Hello, I'm Kirstyn.
And I'm Nicholas. Welcome to the Anthropo Scene.
And we are live.
Good? Are we good? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. The scene is set. Two ecologists from two completely different parts of the world are engaging in a completely unscripted introductory episode to their podcast. We don't have much of an idea of what we're going to say, but we're going to say it well and we're going to say it confidently. So, hello, listeners. Welcome to the first episode.
All right. Welcome, everybody. As Nicholas said, today we are just taking a couple minutes to introduce ourselves and to introduce a little bit about what the podcast is going to be like, the ideas we have for it. Things might change along the way, but we're going to just see little by little how it goes.
As a testament to how unscripted this is, if you hear any beeping or loud machinery noises, they are plowing snow outside of my house right now. To give a little bit of a background on how different our weather patterns are right now, would you like to tell them what your weather's like right now?
So I am actually currently located in Quito, Ecuador. So it's about 12 degrees here, like it normally is. It's a little bit rainy today, so it's not hot sun. I'm originally from Canada, but now I am recording from Ecuador. I've been here 2 years. And yes, it's definitely a little bit warmer than North America.
Sorry, I'm just looking up the conversion for Fahrenheit to
Oh,
Celsius for me.
right. What even is that?
So, for reference, it's 12 degrees Celsius there. It is -6 degrees Celsius up here currently. Um, so, do you want to introduce yourself first then?
So my name is Kirsten Joseph, she, her pronouns. I am originally from Whitehorse, Yukon, pretty far north, but I have a bachelor's in ecology from the University of Calgary. Calgary is a southern city in Alberta, which is in the western side of Canada. As I mentioned, I'm now here in Quito, Ecuador. I have been working the last 2 years, mostly freelancing, doing a lot of different things. And my main goals here is to work towards a career in science communication. So this podcast is a super exciting project for me to start to build up that career. I don't have a ton of hands-on experience with invasive species. I've done a little bit of work with Trout Unlimited in Canada. So definitely seen a lot of rainbow trout, which are a huge, pretty harmful invasive species throughout different parts of Canada, especially in all the different watersheds in Alberta. And then I have worked a little bit with some invasive species plant removal. But this project for me is mostly just to work on getting the word out there and working with Nicholas, who has a little bit more hands on experience, just to talk to you guys about the importance of managing introduced and invasive species around the world.
I think that was great, and I'm gonna have difficulty following up so eloquently, but I will try my best.
It's okay, don't
Um,
worry.
so my name is Nicholas McCarney, he, him pronouns, and I am a Northern Illinois ecologist, born and raised in Northern Illinois, still stuck here, still trying to get out, maybe one day. But for now, my background is restoration ecology, which is essentially I try to restore ecosystems to have native flora and fauna and kind of have their natural ecosystem services. So this means that I work with a lot of invasive species. In college, my degree was in sustainability and environmental management with a focus on invasive species, where I did research on invasive aquatic macrophytes or aquatic plants. That was kind of my first introduction to it, and I followed up with a bunch more in-depth research on different invasive species, and I've been working with invasive species in the field for years, predominantly in their removal and management. Um, that's pretty much all about me as far as my quote-unquote credentials go. Um, so, do we want to start talking about kind of where we're going with this podcast and what our intentions are?
Yeah, I think it'd be great. What we wanted to do for you guys before we really get started is just clean up a little bit of the gross terminology. So we have a couple different things. Now, we are predominantly going to be focusing on invasive species. However, we're also going to look at introduced species, non-natives, and neonatives. So all this means is we want to clear up because all invasive species are introduced, but not all introduced species are invasive. So essentially, an introduced species is a organism, plant, animal, even until bacteria that has been introduced through human activity, and it's either on purpose or by accident. So just to give an example of on purpose is we bring in a type of fish to a system because we want it to eat more mosquitoes, larvae, and get rid of that. An accidental one is we bring in fish in the hulls of our boats and they accidentally get dumped into a lake. So, just a really general example there. And then an invasive species is when an introduced non-native species is starting to harm the environment. They're taking over an area, they're causing problems, they're hurting the native flora and fauna, and they essentially need to be handled in some way. And then we also just have, at some point, we will probably talk about neonative species, which is kind of a new thing that people are coining for organisms that have moved out of their range, mostly due to climate, but they've just moved further north or south or east or west from when they usually are because of climate or maybe other disturbances in other areas. But I'm not sure if you want to add anything else to that.
I would just make one clarification that's not necessarily an official clarification, but as somebody who's spent extensive time working with invasive species, I personally believe that invasive species can both be native and non-native. Generally, you see aggressive native species taking over areas that have a disturbance. I'm thinking of some of the goldenrod species and things like that, where they can take over a community because the ecosystem itself has been so disturbed that it's not necessarily able to keep up with the high reproductivity of these invasive but native species. And then the antithesis of that would be you can have an introduced species that isn't necessarily invasive. A lot of ornamental flowers will escape from gardens and things like that and establish, but they don't necessarily find a niche where they can suffocate out native organisms. So I think the term invasive and what Kirsten and I are basically just trying to do here is say that there's not necessarily a very specific type of organism that falls under this. Um, and we want to clarify that because we will be talking about some of these different species. And also, on a more selfish level, it gives us the opportunity to talk about some species that might not necessarily traditionally fit within those categories, but are still, in the general sense, applicable to what we're trying to accomplish with this podcast.
Right? We're going to essentially do what we want with with a lot of backing from research, and you guys are just coming along for the ride.
Yes.
Awesome. So why do we care? I think this is a great question. Nicholas, what is your take on why anybody should care to listen into this? Why we should care about these issues?
So, for probably the vast majority of our listeners, the reasons we should care probably fall under the category of we want to preserve our native biota, our native flora and fauna, and we want our ecosystems to function at the highest level possible, including all trophic levels and pretty much everything without harming itself. They function naturally like this, and invasive species or introduced species can sort of throw a wrench in the gears and completely collapse an ecosystem. The other reason, if you're trying to explain this maybe to somebody who doesn't necessarily have that much interest in nature, is it's a very aesthetic thing. I'm thinking kudzu and things like that that completely destroy forest ecosystems or will completely wipe out trees, even ornamental grasses and plants and things like that, that most people like, because they care about how pretty they look or something like that. And the disruption to those aesthetics applies on a more fundamental level to a lot of people who aren't necessarily as nature nerdy as we are. Um, so yeah, I think that those are probably the two main reasons why we should care about invasive species. Of course, you can break it down significantly further, and we hope that as you listen to this podcast, you'll kind of get a fundamental understanding of the importance of preserving our native ecosystems, and why invasive species management and control and prevention are so very important to preserving just pretty much the entire planet.
Right. Yeah. And obviously, for a lot of people listening in, the just intrinsic value of respecting nature and trying to put things back to before we messed it up is really
Yeah.
important. But as well, kind of along the aesthetics um, topic and those things, is also a huge economic issue. We're not going to get into numbers and stuff right now. In specific case studies, we will, but a lot of invasive species cause really large problems that are super economically difficult, and they cost a lot of money for people to come in and to get rid of these invasive species that have come in, and they're not just disrupting the natural ecosystems, but they might also be causing harm to people as well. So it's a really complex issue with a lot of different layers. So we hope kind of little by little in each case study we'll get to peel back some of those layers and talk about some of the different issues surrounding that.
I don't know how I forgot to mention money. This is capitalist America that I'm living in right now, and I guess I just forgot that one went over my head. Um,
I'm
but
proud of you.
I thank you. I kind of touched on the fact that I address, or we are attempting to address things in ways that are applicable both to scientifically oriented minded people or just nature oriented people, but also we want our information to be attainable on a general sense. Kirstyn, would you like to kind of explain a little bit about how we're going to be going forward with this podcast and what the actual structure of episodes are going to look like? And then I'll kind of jump in, I suppose. I just feel like you have a better fundamental explanation of it than myself. So I'll let you take the lead on that one.
Right. So, of course, we are sort of figuring this out as we go a little bit. And we want to be really super open and honest with you guys and want everybody to come along for the ride with us, right? But our general idea is that in most episodes, one of us is going to be leading essentially. So, one of us has done the research, they've looked into the species, and they have constructed 95% of the episode. And the other co host is going to be in to have a conversation and to learn along with the listeners at the same time, and then provide feedback, provide any anecdotes maybe that they have as well related to the species or to something similar, and then just sort of be the person to bounce back and forth. And then for most episodes as well, we might have a little bit of a devil's advocate kind of thing where we take a look at whether it's all actually as bad as it seems, because we do see most of the time these big invasions and we only see the negative, but we want to try to play on both sides, and we want this to be accessible, we want it to be fun, educational. And it's in saying that, if you guys are listening in right now, whenever you have any comments or feedback, we're super open to that as well. So we have our Instagram, which will be in the show notes. We have a Facebook, and we have an email. So we're going to be ready to be reached out to be given suggestions, to be given some thumbs up would be great too. But that's the general idea. And of course, our episodes might be a little shorter, a little longer, and they might stray from this structure, but we're hoping that's kind of the idea that we have.
Mhm. I think you put that pretty much ideally how we want to do it. Basically, what we're trying to do is create conversations between not only us and our listeners, but between each other, between me and Kirstyn. Because generally when you're talking to people and you're teaching and you're getting out there and doing and performing science communication in the real world, your listeners are not as well informed. So for both of us to come in and do an insane amount of research on every topic would essentially elevate both of us to the same knowledge level on a topic, and we may not necessarily question certain things that wouldn't appeal to the general public. So by having this sort of one person knows more per episode, one person kind of goes in blind, we're not just limiting one person, but we're actually sort of trying to force a communication and force questions and force the presenter to present it in a way that is both attainable on a higher level, but also to the general population as well. So It's a bit of a challenge for us because we then do have to make sure that our content is attainable at all of those levels. But it's also a little bit of a double-edged sword because then we do get the added bonus of not having to research every single episode. We only have to alternate. And then the only one thing I would add on it is obviously we each have our own experiences with invasive species. If a topic comes up and it covers one of the species that we have a understand, or one person has more of an understanding, then that person will automatically be taking the lead. I don't necessarily know if we have a ton of overlap in species that we worked with or knowledge, so that might not come up that much. But if that's the case, then we'll probably mention that beforehand that we may have a better understanding than we typically do per that episode.
Yeah, I think that's about it. Also, hopefully, at some point, we're gonna have some guest speakers in, whether that be, other ecologists at our level who are working in the field hands-on. Some experts would be really great to have in at some point as well. But essentially, come along with us step by step and enjoy the ride, I guess.
That's a plug for any of you invasive species scientists, biologists, ecologists out there who would like to be featured on an episode. Slide right into our DMs and we would be happy to have you.
Yeah, that's essentially it. I don't have anything else to add for an intro. I think that about wraps up what we're going to do, and we look forward to seeing everybody. Well, seeing everybody. We look forward to have everybody listening in to our first couple episodes. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Anthropo Scene.
Be sure to follow us on all social media and feel free to reach out to us with any comments, corrections, or suggestions for future episodes or species you'd like to see us cover.